Okay, well, thank you so much, Umama. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here to speak about decision making and ethics. It's been a pleasure working with you, and a warm welcome to everyone who is attending today. It's very exciting to be with you, everyone around the world with me here. I'm broadcasting from the United States, from the state of Connecticut, and it's a beautiful day. I hope you're all having a beautiful day as well. I want to just start by saying that decision making is a business leader skill, but it's really something we don't think about deliberately much of the time. Senior executives like you are faced with billions of decisions every day, and you're in fact paid to make these really tough decisions. Whether an executive is successful is often the result of how successful your decisions have been. So given these high stakes, it's incredible to note a particular fact. According to an Ohio State University professor of management, his name is Paul Nutt, we only get about half of our decisions in the workplace right. Only half. There are tried and true processes for making good informed decisions, but research shows that very few people actually use these methods. And I think, as we know, there are clear long-term advantages to making the right strategic decisions. So let's take a look at two of these decision-making practices or models. So there are different practices or models for making decisions depending on the kind of decision that needs to be made. Intuitive decision-making is one model. Studies show that intuitive decision-making may be the quickest and most effective type of decision-making in certain circumstances. In our country, we refer to intuitive decision-making as really using your gut or listening to your gut instinct. So for example, Michael Pratt, who's a professor of management at Boston College, asserts that intuitive decision-making is both efficient, it's quick, and it's effective, but only when a business leader has strong domain experience. That is, when the person making the decision has had many years of work and experience in their particular field. They make what one might call expert judgments based on their previous experience. Intuition works here because the executive is able to distinguish patterns and themes in a given situation based on former scenarios. They can make an informed general decision based on what has worked or not worked in the past. So we can summarize intuitive decision-making by saying it's quick and efficient. It's to be used by someone with strong domain experience, and it's based on patterns and themes that one recognizes from the past. When is it appropriate to use intuitive decision-making? It's often used when there's a high level of uncertainty in the situation. So when facts or time is limited, perhaps, and when the facts available are really just unhelpful to solving the problem. Intuitive decision-making may also be used when there's little situational precedent to draw from. So there's really not much knowledge out there from, or analogous models that you can draw from to make a decision in this case. As an example of intuitive decision-making, we can think of the CEO from T-Mobile International. Today, one of the biggest cell phone manufacturers and companies in the world. When cell phones first entered the scene, quantitative data, so the collection of numerical data, really gave no indication at all that small pocket-sized computers or wireless email or even text messaging would be at all successful. No one really thought that this was something that would be such a massive success. Going against the data, however, T-Mobile made the leap, and they made the leap into this field. And we all know that that decision turned out really well. So sometimes intuition can be very, very effective, even when the data is either inaccessible or simply unavailable. There's a second example of intuitive decision-making from a very different kind of company called KTM Sport Motorcycle. And they're a large manufacturer of motorcycles in Austria. In 1992, the company was bankrupt, and so they hired a new CEO, and the CEO turned around the company in the first 2 years, but then he took the company unexpectedly in a very different direction. Most people thought he was crazy. He turned from focusing on off-road kinds of cycles and vehicles to street motorcycles, a completely different business. And despite the company's lack of expertise and access to this new kind of business and new kind of market, the CEO's intuition was the deciding factor, and the move was a great success. So by 2006, 29% of the company's revenues was derived by its street segment. Again, intuitive decision-making can be very, very effective. A second model for decision-making is called the rational model. The rational model, unlike the intuitive model, is data-driven and focused on analytical reasoning. The rational model is often preferred over the intuitive model for its objectivity. So to sum up the rational model, it's data-driven, it's focused on analytical reasoning, and it aims for objectivity. When should one use the rational model? The rational model is extremely useful for complex projects where facts and precedent are available. So the facts here are very helpful in making a decision, and where multiple scenarios need to be addressed and analyzed. We're going to talk a little bit more about the rational model now, and then we'll discuss how ethics can fit into rational decision-making. So the rational model moves through 7 steps typically. The following steps are the 7 that are typically identified. So the process goes like this. The first thing is one identifies the problem or the opportunity that's present. The second step is to gather the relevant information that will help you make the decision about the problem or the opportunity. The third step is analyzing the situation, which includes strategizing what alternative scenarios might be possible. What are the different options? Perhaps you contextualize the situation in different kinds of frames, or you try and see it from different points of view. The fourth step is to really develop those multiple options in greater detail. Step 5 is you evaluate those options. And then finally, based on your evaluation, you select a preferred option and then implement it and act on the decision. The rational model can't eliminate risk in your strategic decision-making, but it is an essential process to predict best outcomes. There's an example that I often give through the restaurant McDonald's, and Harvard Business Review talks about this example at great length in a case study. So let's say that McDonald's executives must decide where to locate a new restaurant. The company has or can get all the information it needs to be reasonably certain how a given location will perform. So first you identify the problem or opportunity, as on this model, which is that there's an opportunity to open a new restaurant. And second, you gather information. So here, in the case of McDonald's, you know the variables that matter for success. There's local demographics, there's traffic patterns, there's real estate availability and prices, There's the locations of competitors, etc. You also have, in this case, rich data sources on all those variables. Third, you have really well-calibrated restaurant revenue and cost models from all the other locations. And together, all of this information provides you with a very probable scenario for cash flow to predict how the new restaurant will perform. So here I've brought you through the first 3 steps using the McDonald's case, where you analyze the situation and you really have a very probable outcome. Now, you might want to consider other locations as well, and you might run scenarios of several different locations to determine which location would perform most optimally. And that would be part of step 4, where you develop options, and 5, you evaluate those options. For step 6, you would base your decision about where to open the restaurant at the location that has the greatest business success according to your analyzed data. And then you would simply act on that decision and open the location. But here's the question. What if I included in this scenario that opening that new, most profitable McDonald's restaurant would likely put some of the local restaurants, which are privately owned and have been there for decades, out of business? McDonald's is a global brand, and it would likely cut into the local business revenue to the breaking point, causing those local businesses to cut prices to compete, leading to the closing of those local restaurants and a kind of breakdown of that local community. This question now raises another issue that's often left out in business decision-making models, and this is the question of ethics. When making a decision, a business leader usually asks these 3 questions. 1, does it optimize the bottom line? An essential question, because really And so Chevron did optimize their bottom line, but at a great ethical cost. What Chevron did met the 3 criteria normally applied to business decisions as we discussed above. Their actions did optimize the bottom line. Their actions were legal within Ecuador, and they did comply with their contracts. But it importantly left out that 4th question, which is it ethical? And human tragedy really followed in the company's wake. Extremely expensive lawsuits also often follow these kinds of tragedies that in the end fail to support business trust, growth, and success. Now, Chevron is an extreme example. Less extreme examples may not be much easier, though. So maybe, for example, you're faced with a budget deficit and you need to cut significant costs in your company. How will you think through this problem? Will you choose to make layoffs to, of course, address your bottom line? If so, who will get laid off and who will keep their jobs? How do you make this determination? Or maybe you'll choose a different plan of action and you'll, instead of doing layoffs, you'll reduce salaries across the entire company. Will you reduce everyone's salaries by equal percentages in this case? Or will you reduce some more than others? And what will inform your choices? You might also ask, who will be involved in the decision-making? Since all employees will be affected, why are decisions only made at the top, as is typically done? And then when and how will your decision be made public? What do you think will be the reaction to the decision you make? Business decisions typically affect a great number of people, so it's crucial to incorporate these kinds of reflective questions about company values and personal values at every step in the decision-making process. The Markula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University offers some key questions that you could incorporate into your business decision-making that can help you ensure that ethics is part of your business leadership. Here, I incorporate these questions into the standard rational decision-making model. So for example, we have here on one side of your screen the first 3 steps of the rational model, which is identify a problem or opportunity, gather information, and analyze the situation. So when you're going through this rational model, here are the ethical additions that I would place to flesh out the ethical aspects of each of these steps. So first, in terms of step 1, recognize if there is an ethical dimension to the problem or the opportunity you're confronted with. For example, as we talked about before, is this about a choice between good and bad or between bad and bad? Is this about more than what is legal or most efficient? And if yes, how so? In terms of step 2, when you're gathering information, also ask, do I have enough information to make a decision? What facts are not known? And really, can I learn more? And these questions are really about not engaging in what's called willful blindness. So perhaps you know that there's a real problematic situation within the opportunity that you're pursuing. Are you choosing to ignore that for the sake of advancing your agenda? Or can you really embrace that there's this problem inside of the context that needs to be addressed and simply address it? Regarding the 3rd step, it's important to ask, when analyzing the situation, can the situation be damaging to someone or some group? Who are all those who are concerned and will be affected? And are some concerns more important than others? Why? Also ask, have all concerned parties been consulted? Here we have the remaining 4 steps of the rational model. So for step 4, the ethical question involved here is, have I identified creative solutions when developing options? And if not, what more do you need to know? Perhaps what community partners do you need to engage with in order to develop those creative options. In terms of evaluating options, ask which option will produce the most good and do the least harm. Which option treats people equally or proportionally? And which option leads me to act as the sort of person I want to be? This will take some introspection as well. And what are your own personal values? In addition, you want to represent the values of your own company. So if your company has a written mission or vision statement, here is also where you want to ask what option really correlates and harmonizes with the company's mission or vision. What are the company's stated values? If you don't have those stated values written anywhere, it would be a very good idea to put leadership together and articulate that kind of value statement. In terms of step 6, you select a preferred option, and once you've kind of honed in on one option, apply what's called the sunlight test. Ask, if my decision were on the front page of every newspaper tomorrow, what would people say? How would they react to it? It's a good litmus test for how others will respond to your decision. And finally, once you've acted on the decision, think about how it can be implemented with the greatest care and attention for all stakeholders. So even if you need to choose between 2 bad decisions, neither one of which is really a perfect decision, you could still implement that decision with care and with instilling dignity in all people involved. So for example, if you're forced to implement layoffs to meet your bottom line, if you simply have to, how do you implement those layoffs, granting the most dignity possible to all workers, even those who in the end must be laid off? Leadership is often not just about quantitative data or predictable results. It's about making something happen and building goodwill and trust. As a business leader who wants to lead ethically, you get to say, we are going to make this happen because it is the right thing to do. And with that, I want to thank you for engaging in my seminar today on ethics in decision-making. I hope that marrying ethics with your rational business model yields the best outcomes for you and your business. I invite questions if anyone has them. I am pleased to take any questions that you write onto the screen. Thank you, Umama, again, and GBNTC for hosting me today.
Sorry. Folks, we are now open for the question answer session. If you have any questions, please you can write the questions in the question box given in the end of the webinar console, or you could directly raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon available on the webinar console. So let me go straight to the question box. One is we have a question for you that what if we need to choose between 2 bad decisions? What choice do we make?
Well, thank you, Umama, for the question. If you have a situation like that, you do have my sympathy because it's a really tough position to be in. But unfortunately, it does happen quite frequently. And I think it really comes down to doing your research and assessing the problem from all sides. So in this kind of scenario, not just collecting data, but qualitative research, dialoguing with people, interviewing people is really important because you're hearing from diverse constituencies and you're getting an assessment of the problem from many different points of view. So this will help. In some really tough cases, it may also be a conversation you have about your own personal sense of ethics. So, you know, there's a case I know where there's someone in a job where they're manufacturing parts and testing the quality of those parts. And they're on a very, very tight timeline. So they never really have enough time to test the kind of quality that they need to. And they need to send out materials before their competitor can send out those same materials. Because if they can't operate on that timeline, they'll lose the business. So this means they're often put in the position of sending out defective materials, ones that won't work very well, that will have effects on the customer. So what do you do in that kind of decision? That's really a decision between bad and a bad. It's compromising your personal ethics to send out quality material. On the other hand, you'll lose your job. So I would say you really need to sit with yourself and the supporters around you and weigh your various options and see what's possible. So there are many possible paths to take here, and each will give different benefits. It depends what's most important in terms of, you know, your own values and needs, I would say. And it's a really tough position to be in.
Thank you, Vanessa. We have another one for you, that is, what is the bounded rationality and how is it related to decision making?
What is say the first part, please, again, Umama?
What is the bounded rationality?
The bounded rationality. The bounded rationality is really the limits of our own thought process. So it usually involves some kind of bias, typically unconscious bias in our minds that comes simply from, you know, the culture we're in, the way we grew up, the things we see in the media. We all have these kinds of unconscious bias that come into our decision making and affect it in a very indirect way. So bounded rationality is really the bounding of our own minds, or the limits of our own mind and thought process, which is why decision making without being in dialogue and conversation with diverse constituencies can often be troubling, because you're not sure really what those unconscious biases are. Okay.
Thank you, Vanessa. We have another one, that is, how effectively can we manage decision making in our team setting?
How effectively can you manage decision making in your team setting? Fantastic question as well. I think it depends largely on what kind of decision you need to make. So as we've seen, we saw a few different examples through the presentation. The intuitive model was one where, you know, a team did collect data, but the decision was to go against the data based on really the CEO's gut feeling and intuition that this new product was going to be successful. And it just wasn't based on any precedent. So when you're managing that kind of team setting, you do have a clear decision maker as opposed to a team making a decision, right? In the rational model, you really have, I think, more of a team assessment that ultimately makes a decision together. And so the best way to work in team is to have different people responsible for different gathering of information. So you would delegate responsibilities and come together to assess various scenarios fairly frequently once the data has been gathered, to go over the possible scenarios. But team making, I think, is the best way to make those decisions, at least while you're in that process of gathering data, because you are getting those diverse perspectives, and creativity is generated through the team process. So a facilitation of team perspectives informed by the data collection, I think, is very important.